they forgot to do an MCI, essentially.
Ladies, gentlemen, and those with the good sense to do away with the whole notion, I welcome you to the premier audio medium for all your Fazbear entertainment needs. The Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. Note, FFPP is not responsible for any loss of appetite, disinterest, dismemberment, or other legally classified statuses. So strap in and enjoy.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. I'm your host of the Toast, Toast, here to talk about Five Nights at Freddy's, like we always do. And you might notice a slight difference in audio quality today. I'm using the same microphone as always, but I finally figured out how to put just like an EQ, a good compressor, stuff like that on the microphone as it's being recorded, because it's the same microphone I use while streaming. I would do it in post typically, but it's just something I'm not very good at doing. And somebody else had Harris Heller has a preset for just like a good EQ. And hopefully that's what this sounds like. If it's distracting, if it's too different, if we don't like it, let me know and I'll never do it again. If I'm the only one that notices it, then it's also very likely. It's also very possible. I know my wife who's editing this is probably already essentially saying, hey, nobody notices, move on. But I think it sounds different. So I just want to make sure if you guys think it sounds different too, to let me know. But if it sounds better, different, that's all that matters. We're going to go right into our topics today. We have one Patreon question, and that is from a writer, they, them, who asks, is there a reason the Candy Cadet stories have to be about one specific event or another? It seems whenever I see people theorize on what the stories mean, they operate on the assumption that they can only be about one thing, not multiple. But one of FNAF's themes is that history repeats itself, or rhymes or whatever. Echoes of the same tragedies repeating over and over. So couldn't Candy Cadet's story be about what happens in Secret of the Mimic and Ruin and Help Wanted, etc. simultaneously? Thank you for your question. I mean, yes. At the end of the day, there's nothing saying that these stories have to be about one specific topic. Especially since so much in FNAF is not repetitive, but it rhymes, right? Like it was said in the interview. History doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. So on one hand, I see your point here that like Candy Cadet stories don't necessarily have to be about one specific event. They could be about multiple, but I think that's just part of the argument you have to make. So you could argue that Candy Cadet is not necessarily, the stories aren't about a specific thing, but a topic. I think that's an easier argument to make. And I think it's easiest to make in relation to the FNAF 6, like the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Simulator, Candy Cadet stories. Because they're all kind of about similar things, right? Like all of them at the end of the day are referring to something, taking multiple things, merging them into one thing, and then ruining it in the process in some way. Now, on one hand, you could argue that this is specifically about like Molten MCI or something, or things along those lines. You could directly argue that, and I think that's valid. But at the same time, they're all so similar in that way that I think you could very easily make the argument that the Candy Cadet stories aren't trying to describe or directly detail what exactly happened to Molten MCI, but rather are just like introducing that concept. You know, introducing the concept of like, this is something that can happen under these circumstances in this universe. So to that end, I see your point. The point that like, yes, it is possible that Candy Cadet is talking about something specific, but it could be more general. At the same time, I would hesitate to say the Candy Cadet stories are about multiple specific things at once. Only because that's kind of a confusing narrative device to be like, hey, here's a story that describes 3 different events in the franchise. It's like, sure. I think it's an easier argument to make that the Candy Cadet stories aren't about specific things, but concepts. And then, we get the same thing in Ruin, where the Candy Cadet story is that, like, the boy and the mother who live in the woods, and there's a monster locked in the basement, and the mother would sing a song every night to calm the boy down, and then the mom leaves one day, and the boy hears the song from the basement, and the monster had learned the song and can sing it in his mother's voice, so he opens the door. Is this telling us, so this is very clearly Cassie letting the mimic out of the basement, right? Is this Candy Cadet telling us that Cassie's dad sang her a song every night when she went to sleep, and then the mimic copied Cassie's dad's voice and sang the same song? No. Is it telling us that Gregory was like a parental figure to Cassie? No. It's telling us the idea of a monster that can pretend to be somebody else in order to trick them, right? Like that's the whole concept. And it's there to introduce that concept to an audience who has never heard of the mimic before, right? Like, yes, I mentioned this in the Candy Cadet video, but if you have been reading the books, you know about the mimic by the time of Ruin. So, like, going there, once we hear Gregor on the walkie-talkie, it's like, oh, okay, I know what's going on. But for a general audience who isn't reading all the FNAF books and isn't keeping up with online theories and stuff, just playing Ruin without any warning, the mimic feels like an out-of-nowhere thing. Like, what do you mean there's a robot that just, like, showed up suddenly? And, like, endings like that are typically best served for secret endings because they're aimed at players who would be looking into it. Look at Security Breach, right? Security Breach has like 6 endings. And if you just play the game normally, you get the ending where you leave, you get captured, and you die. And like that makes sense for an average audience. It's something an average audience member could be like, oh, I guess that's the bad ending, and I could go back for more endings if I want to. And all the other endings still kind of make sense within the game. There's one ending that without context of the history of the franchise makes no sense, and that's the Burn Trap ending. The ending where we go down underground, we see a pizzeria hidden underground, and in that pizzeria, there's a guy who's in a burnt rabbit outfit, and he's like this dead corpse that's somehow alive, and we're using... There's for some reason rooms that can light on fire that we're using to fight him. What does any of this mean? The reason this works is because that ending is the hardest to get to. It's locked behind the entire second playthrough, or like second quote-unquote playthrough of that game, where you have to do the other branching path you didn't do previously. You have to know where you're going. You have to explore more. I mean, because even when you get both Chica and Monty on Freddy, does the game ever explain to you to go to Roxy Raceway? I don't think it does. At least I don't remember at any point the game being like, now, Freddy being like, now that I have both, we can get further into Roxy Raceway. I don't remember that. But if you are collecting all your collectibles and playing the game thoroughly, there are several duffel bag messages that mention something's under Roxy Raceway. There's something down there that is drawing power. People are trying to figure out what's going on down there. So like there is lore and Easter eggs in the game, basically being like there's something underneath Roxy Raceway. So what they've done, which is really smart, they've buried this very cryptic ending behind wanting to fully beat all the game endings, because you have to be willing to go back post 6 a.m. where there's only one save state or only one save station, and do a whole secondary objective while constantly coming back to save at that one save station, which at launch didn't even exist. So you had to do the entirety of that without a save station, which terrible decision, by the way. Oh my god, I still remember getting so pissed because I played on launch. I'll say the tangent till after. I don't want to lose my train of thought here, but you have to do this whole side objective. So one, somebody who's very dedicated to seeing all this game has to offer, implying that they are a fan of Five Nights at Freddy's. But not only that, somebody who's willing to either explore every area thoroughly or collect all collectibles. Because other than that, I don't know how you're supposed to figure out to go to Roxy Raceway. I don't remember there being an objective that says like go to Roxy Raceway. I really don't. Maybe there is, and I'm making an ass of myself. But even if that, like, the first point still stands, but if that objective does not exist, then the game is also requiring you to be the kind of player who's going to seek out all the duffel bag messages and is going to thoroughly explore. And what they've done is they've put this very cryptic ending through they've put the player base through a filter to find the people who are really interested to see all this game has to offer and dedicated to looking for secrets, which is a Five Nights at Freddy's fan. So they've taken this very weird, very cryptic ending and buried it in the filter of only the players who will probably understand what's going on are going to find this, which is very smart on their part. So why did I bring this up? Ruin has 3 endings, but all 3 endings start with encountering the Mimic. So every player is going to encounter the Mimic. And that's what I think Candy Cadet exists there for. He is very obvious. You have to pass him on the way down, and you're probably going to have a coin when you get there because they're all over the place in the way visually in front of you. So you don't need to necessarily be like a huge FNAF fan to listen to Candy Cadet's story about this monster who pretends to use a voice to trick a boy into letting it out and to encounter the Mimic. So what do they do here so it's still understandable? Well, instead of putting the game through this filter so only the people who will know, because because it's also books and they can't really test for books, you know, and you need to encounter the Mimic because they need to introduce the Mimic in this game. Instead of hoping that you get players who know what's going on because of the books, they need to inform players. And that's what Candy Cadet's purpose in Ruin is. It's to inform. It's to say, hey, general player base, here's a story about a monster that pretends to be somebody else to trick and kill them. Now you can meet the endoskeleton who's been pretending to be Gregory. So you're already primed to be like, oh, there's a creature down here that pretended to be Gregory to trick and kill us. And I just think it's a necessary step to explain to the player what's going on before we get there subtly. Because, like, that way you get to piece together yourself, which is more satisfying, right? It's more satisfying to be handed pieces to a puzzle. And then once you get the final piece, you can be like, that's the puzzle. Way more satisfying than, imagine if there's not a Candy Cadet and they still need to make sure they explain what the Mimic is. So you encounter the Mimic and then that Gregory walkie-talkie call, he's like, hey, yeah, that's the Mimic. It can copy people's voices and fit into anything. And we're really worried that it's trying to kill people. It's like, okay, thanks for just telling me. Instead, we get Gregory being like, I don't know what it is, but it's been down there a long time. You got to get out of there, dude. So it just makes for a more satisfying setup. So to your question, Ryder, we now have 2 instances of Candy Cadet that are exactly what you're saying. Where we have, you know, in Pizzeria Simulator, you could very easily make the argument that Candy Cadet is more so talking about the concept of if you combine desperate things, you'll make a shattered whole. Something that is not right. Something that is wrong. And I think that is a fair argument to make. I think you could very easily make an argument for Candy Cadet and Pizzeria Simulator to be specifically talking about a few different things. I know I'm actually quite partial to ID's Fantasy's thoughts on the fact that each story is about a different thing. I believe that's ID's Fantasy. Because there are some important differences between those stories. And then we go to Ruin, where it's not about a thing that happened. It's about the concept of the villain we're about to meet. Because again, I really don't think that it never copies Cassie's dad, and I don't think Gregory is supposed to be the mother in that story. So, and you could make the argument that it's just, I'm taking it too literally, and it's just a metaphor for what's happening, which is true. The idea of like a monster copying the voice of someone the main character trusts to trick them, that's still a good metaphor for what is actively happening in this moment. But like, if we're going to abstract the story that much anyway, then it kind of is just telling us a general idea, right? Like, so it's still kind of the same thing. So far, you're just right, Ryder. You know, most likely, at least, you know, for Ruin you are. For Pizzeria Simulator, could be. Then we move to Help Wanted 2. And Help Wanted 2 is interesting because there's two stories. And it's the pizza story and it's the woods story. So for those of you who don't know or didn't watch the recent episodes, the pizza story is, it's not really a story. It's like more of like a jokey advertisement where it's essentially like, I will tell you a story about a family that was offered the deal of a lifetime from a pizza place. It was like a large pizza and drinks, blah, blah, blah. The family did not take the deal and they all died. Right. And then the next story is essentially, I think it's a man. Let me look this one up because this one I don't fully remember. Woman. It was a woman. It was a young woman who, when she was little, is led into the dark. She's led into the woods by a witch and is almost eaten. You know what? Let me just read it out because there's details here that are important. Now, let me tell you a story. Could you imagine? Now, let me tell you a story about a young woman who, when she was little, was led into the dark. Oh, lock in. Now, let me tell you a story about a young woman who, when she was little, was led into a dark forest by a witch and almost eaten. She had fallen for the friendly voice without discernment and was led astray. She had escaped before being thrown into the oven, but would have a scar for the rest of her life. When she had grown, she sought revenge on the witch and entered the forest again willingly, this time with the confidence of age and experience. She was greeted at the mouth of the forest by a young boy who offered to help guide her through the darkness. She welcomed the help and followed the young boy over the river, through the jagged trees, and toward a small house. "Come," the boy said. "Rest here before killing the witch." The young woman was tired and would kill the witch in the morning. She followed the boy into the house. The oven door closed. The witch would finally have her meal. So it's this concept of someone facing off against this big bad villain, getting away, leaving scarred, and then later in life trying again, but being tricked by a young boy into falling for the trap for good. There's so many good ways to look at this. So clearly this is about the mimic, right? And I think part of the reason why I think that's so obvious is that second sentence that I kind of forgot about until now. She had fallen for the friendly voice without discernment and was led astray. That's so that like every time the mimic's been brought up in one of these stories, it's about like copying a voice. And we know the mimic copies voices. That's the point. So we know because this is so specific, I think there is an argument to make here that it's about a specific instance. Because if this is supposed to be about a general concept, then what is this story really telling us? Like, when you face off against something and then try again later, you'll be tricked by a new thing? Sure. It's so very specific. The other ones, I think you can break down more generally. The Ruin story, a monster tricks a boy by pretending to be his mother. Okay, so monster pretends to be somebody else and tricks them. The pizza sim stories are, you know, they're weirdly specific. You know, it's like a cat. There's cats being stitched together and keys being melted into one thing. But they all are similar in theme of turning multiple things into one thing that doesn't work. In a way, right? But this story, not only is it long, it's so weirdly specific. There is a young woman who goes into the woods, faces off against who's led into the woods by a witch, faces off, escapes but gets a scar. Later in life tries again, but when she goes, there's a little boy now, and the little boy leads her into the, like, it's so detailed and specific and weird that if you want to generalize it, the best way you could generalize it would be like, oh, if you barely escape something and then try to face off with it again later in life, you'll lose because it'll learn a new trick. Okay. So that's to really put a bow on it, to your question specifically. Is there a reason the Candy Cadet stories have to be about one specific event? I would say generally, no. It depends on the story. I think if you can generalize a story enough to make it fairly straightforward or simple or easier to break down, then yes, you can use it to talk about multiple events, or it could just be about like a concept, an idea. I think that's valid. But if it's so detailed and all of those details are necessary to the story, then I think it warrants being like, it really only can be about one specific event. That's my thought process anyway, is if it's vague enough, it could be a theme, it could be multiple events. If it's specific, then it's probably specific. But thank you for your question. So now we're going to hop over to the email. Our first question comes from Gavin, him. Seeing how the Pizzaplex replaced both Bonnie and Foxy, do you think at some point they would have planned to replace both Freddy and Chica as well? And if so, who do you think they would replace them with? If I had to guess, I'd say they replaced Freddy with a white tiger animatronic, and perhaps Chica with either a duck or flamingo animatronic. Thank you for your question. So, it's weird, right? Because it is interesting. That's one of the things that really struck people, rightfully so, about Security Breach. That, like, for whatever reason, Bonnie and Foxy were missing. Now, Foxy, it's weird that he's not there, but sure. But Bonnie is nowhere to be found. That's strange. Now, I wonder if Scott and Steel just don't like having multiple Bonnies in a game. And the fact that Burn Trap is here is the reason why we don't get to see Glamrock Bonnie. We could also make the argument that Bonnie being replaced by Monty is less purposeful. Because there's the whole like Glamrock Bonnie mystery. Whereas Glamrock Foxy, just MIA. Just not here. I always make the argument that Captain Foxy is Glamrock Foxy only because he's the closest thing we have to it. And we know there's going to be the log flume. But it is very strange that there's just no Foxy at all. So the thinking that I have here is, I think the train of logic needs to go to, why was it Monty and Roxanne Wolf, Montgomery Gator and Roxanne Wolf, characters who to us were introduced in Security Breach, but these characters who were original to Murray's Costume Manor. This has to be Mimic shenanigans, right? At least that's my first thought, is like, okay, so this has something to do with the Mimic because it's things from the Mimic's like birthplace replacing things from Fazbear. Part of me wonders if the Mimic in some way shares the sentiment that Edwin had about hating Fazbear. And maybe that's just something it picked up watching Edwin, who can say, but it's the idea of it's the original Fazbear gang being replaced by Murray's Costume Manor characters. Part of me doubts that, because the ending for Secret of the Mimic, the bad ending, where it seems like the Mimic really enjoys watching the Fazbear characters perform. So like, that's weird. Why would he now hate it? So there's got to be something else there. It could, you always want to say, well, maybe it's just the CEO wants new things to try to draw people in. But I hesitate because we know for a fact Bonnie was replaced. Foxy is the weird question mark though, because we don't know that Foxy was replaced. We know they were planning to build a whole attraction next to Roxy Raceway for Foxy. The log flume. It was in process of being built when everything went down. So like, what's up? And like, Foxy does have Kids Cove, but it's very small and lackluster. It's like a side room with like 2 obstacle furniture things in it. It doesn't really feel like it. And then you look at the daycare. The daycare that's next to Kids Cove through the wall that we can't walk through. And you realize maybe Foxy was replaced. In Tales from the Pizzaplex, they mention briefly the daycare and the fact that the daycare attendant was not always there. The daycare attendant was originally a performer in the daycare theater where they performed like a Jekyll and Hyde act with Sun and Moon. And that's the reason why there's generators in the daycare, because for some reason that Sun Moon character was shifted into the daycare assistant role. But they couldn't get rid of the Moon programming, so instead they just filled the place with generators so the lights would always stay on, so he was always in Sun. That was their goal. So you have to stop and think, well, wait, that means that whoever is the daycare attendant, it wasn't originally Sun and Moon. So who was it? Well, the only other person we have that references any kind of childcare is Foxy in Kid's Cove, where he's got a big Foxy statue in a little kid play area that, and I could be mistaken, but I swear to God, there's a big like garage door that's closed in Security Breach next to Kid's Cove. And I swear it's the one that's adjacent to the daycare. I could be wrong, but I swear like when that opens, that would be one connected area. So maybe Foxy was the daycare attendant, but for some reason was replaced. And then once he was replaced at that, they fully replaced him with Roxanne. So the question is, why? I don't know. Because to answer your question, Gavin, would they have replaced Freddy and Chica? And who would they replace them with? To answer that, we need to know why they replaced Bonnie and Foxy. Bonnie, I think you could argue, was happenstance. Maybe they didn't plan to destroy Bonnie. And it was just like, I guess Monty's there. But Foxy at least seems more intentional. I truly don't know. And I don't know if they'd have the guts to replace Freddy, because he's kind of like the face. Right, like you need, if it's gonna be the Fazbear Mega Pizzaplex, right? Freddy Fazbear Mega Pizzaplex, or whatever the official title of that place is. You can't get nostalgia bait if Freddy's not there, frankly. And to the point of, is the mimic involved here? I wonder if they wouldn't have replaced Chica, because after all, Chica is technically a Murray's Costume Manor original. Where like Chica's Party World, or whatever the restaurant mentioned in Secret of the Mimic is, it seems like Chica was an established character somewhere else, and MCM made the first costume for her. Like Murray's Costume Manor made the first like Chica costume for this other business, and then I guess they eventually just fully bought Chica at that point, because we see a bunch of her in the warehouse. So if anything, Chica is more of an MCM character than a FNAF character, or a Fazbear's character. The only one that like truly is a Fazbear character that's left is Freddy. I don't know if they can replace Freddy. I don't know. I think it's something that to this day we don't really have a good answer for. Is why is it Monty and Roxy? There's never been a good answer for that, and I think it's worthwhile to look into. But without knowing why, and just guessing here, I think Tiger Rock does make the most sense for a Freddy replacement. He's frontman status. He's got good iconography. He is, the Mimic's favorite. So putting him front and center makes sense. It all really lines up pretty damn well for it to be Tiger Rock. And they're also like visually similar, Glamrock Freddy and Tiger Rock. But thank you for your question, Gavin. Our next one comes from Jacob, him. I had a realization about Scott's hint about what's seen in the shadows is easily misunderstood in the mind of a child. We've always tried to tie it to the bite victim, but it might be about Freddy's animatronics. Or it might be about the Freddy's animatronics. And moreover, about Follow Me. Maybe you have a better idea than I do, but my first thought is that Shadow Freddy was just Purple Guy all along. It stuck out to me that Shadow Freddy is Shadow Freddy, but RWQF has never been called Shadow Bonnie canonically. I think that's because Shadow Freddy is indeed a misinterpreted shadow, or WQ is an agony manifestation of William's misdeeds. Exactly why both appear in FNAF World, but only one of them appears in Ultimate Custom Night. That's a good idea. No, I do like that. What's seen in the shadows is easily misunderstood in the mind of a child. Kind of our way of telling us there's no purple Freddy suit, So what to go over again with this? Thank you for question. To go over what this is saying, in Follow Me, each night, US playing as the animatronics follow this weird purple Freddy towards the FNAF 1 back room until eventually William jumps out and disassembles you. And what Jacob is suggesting is that what's seen in the shadows is easily misunderstood in the mind of a child. Isn't about the bite victim seeing like thinking he saw a Springlock suit or something weird like that, but instead of Follow Me, where the animatronics, who are possessed with the minds of children, are seeing this weird shadow-like Freddy. Literally, something seen in the shadows being misunderstood in the mind of a child. And I think that really does. It's got legs. I really like that interpretation because it is directly what's happening here, depending on what you think Shadow Freddy is. If it's William Afton tricking them into a trap, bada bing, bada boom, that's exactly what you're describing. If it's instead, Cassidy trying to lead them to take care of William Afton, it falls apart a bit, but there's not a lot of good evidence for that. I've only really ever said that Shadow Freddy and Follow Me is Cassidy in trying to figure out like what Follow Me is actually telling us. And there's decent ways to interpret that. The fact that like when you're playing as the fifth spirit, Shadow Freddy does not show up, or the idea that like Cassie's always been like more of the vengeful type. So to take on a role where you're leading animatronics to William Afton does make sense, But, the counterpoints, well, it never works every single time. You'd think she'd stop doing it. And second counterpoint, why would Cassidy be Shadow Freddy? Like that's just that is just a stretch, to be fair. So like there's less counter arguments for this interpretation, Jacob, that it's just William Afton tricking the animatronics and they see him as a purple Freddy thing because they have the mind of children seeing a figure in the dark. So yeah, no, I think that's a very good way to interpret that, Jacob. I actually like that a lot. Thank you for your question. Next one comes from Scar, he, him. So this is less of a theory, but wanting to know your perspective on something I've noticed in the fandom. Do you think there's an idolization of Scottgames that leads to more harsher criticism of the Steelwool games? I've noticed this while watching old reviews of Ruin, how most of the criticism they present in needing to read the books were solved with the release of Secret of the Mimic. I think people tend to forget we got introduced to random purple sprite back in FNAF 2 we knew nothing about except for the fact it was probably the murderer. Yeah, so thank you for your question. I have two opposite thoughts about this, because I agree and disagree with you fully in two different ways. So in the ways that I agree with you is definitely lore presentation, to an extent, because you're right. When you look back on the Scottgames of FNAF now, it's all one very cohesive piece. It's like, oh yeah, this all makes sense. But as they were coming out, we didn't get fuck all for a long time. FNAF 2 just showed us like a purple guy killing kids, and that's all we had. And then FNAF 3 comes out, and like we see a guy die in a Springlock suit, and he's purple, so it's like, okay, maybe this was purple guy, and that's what happened to him. And then FNAF 4 comes out. It doesn't line up with anything. And we see a purple guy putting people into suits in a back room somewhere. That's weird. Why am I in a house now? And then Sister Location comes out and starts giving us some answers. And then Pizzeria Simulator comes out and gives us a lot of answers and then ends. And then we have to put the pieces together. And sure, there's FNAF 1 Ultimate Custom, but we have to sit there taking our jigsaw and putting everything together and trying to piece something that like visually and storytelling wise makes sense. We haven't gotten our pizza sim yet in Steelwool, right? Like that's part of it, is we haven't gotten our Sister Location. I think if we're thinking logically here, the Steelwool games, Secret of the Mimic was Sister Location. It's like the first one with a lot of like, here's a lot of lore all at once to help you start piecing things together. And I think our next game is going to be Pizza Sim. It's our big, like, here's all the lore. Now I would say I fully agree with you that the lore is being presented in the same way and it's just nostalgia. I think there is a fundamental difference. There's one fundamental difference. And it's one that I've complained about before on this channel. And it's the fact that there's no big mystery yet. They forgot to do an MCI, essentially, where in FNAF 1, the first thing we hear about is the missing child incident on the newspapers. The fact that 5 kids went missing, and there's haunted animatronics right away. So it's like, okay, there are haunted animatronics, kids went missing, that's what happened. And then every piece of information we get out since then, we can go back and try to piece it together. So like, okay, FNAF 1 teaches us the missing child incident happened. There are haunted animatronics. FNAF 2, we start seeing this purple guy killing kids. I was like, is that the MCI? And we start linking that to there. And then the third game comes out. And we see them dealing with him. It's like, okay, has this been solved? And then the fourth game comes out and shows us, oh wait, another kid died. Is this before the MCI? And we keep getting to link it back to the major question that we're having. But so far, for security breach in like the Steel Wool era, there hasn't been that central mystery. There just hasn't been something to link to. So everything feels kind of listless. Like you could argue, I think the best argument to make here is the MCI is supposed to be the like 9 missing people on the newspaper in security breach. Where, like Gregory tries to leave and he's like, people will keep going missing. But if you leave anyway, you get shown a newspaper article that says people are going missing. So, okay, I guess that's our central mystery, but it never really gets brought up again. And there's, as far as we're aware, none of the animatronics seem very haunted, because the real central mystery is the mimic. Right? Because in Help Wanted, the first game of the Steel Wool, we get the slight secret introduction of the mimic, where at the time we just knew it as Glitch Trap. And then we get more information about the mimic in Security Breach, but we didn't really know it at the time. And we get more information about the mimic in Help Wanted 2. We get more information about the mimic in Ruin. And now we get Secret of the Mimic, which is this big info dump on the mimic. All of this has been about the mimic. It's like, okay, so the mimic is the MCI. Problem. The MCI was like a problem that needs to be fixed. And it was like an active issue, right? Where like the MCI caused animatronics to be haunted and is causing all these bad things to happen. And William Afton needs to be stopped before it happens again. The problem with the mimic is that until Cassie let it out in Ruin, there was like a virus that needed to be stopped. But like it doesn't quite, there's nothing really to solve about it. Like with the MCI, we had to figure out like where it happened, why it happened, all this. Where with the mimic, it's like the mimic exists, fix it. It's like, okay. There's just, it doesn't quite work the same way. It's a different question fundamentally. So I think that's where a lot of people are getting stuck for the lore presentation, is that yes, the lore is still being presented in this weird way where you need to read the books to understand. Because hey, in the original Scottgames, the name William Afton isn't introduced until Pizza Sim. If you don't read the books, you don't get to know that until then. And just like, Steel Wool, Edwin Murray and the Mimic was introduced in the books, but you didn't get to know that in the games until Secret of the Mimic. So it's the exact same way. The presentation hasn't changed. The issue is that the question is fundamentally different, but it's being treated the same way. So it feels a bit more listless. No one really knows what we're supposed to be solving for right now. But the thing that I agree with you more on is the games themselves. Hey, maybe a hot take. The original run of the FNAF games aren't that great of like playable games. FNAF 1, I think, is still one of the strongest ones. It has the best Uncanny Valley horror, which is where FNAF has its strongest suit. And it's like probably one of the more balanced sit and survives. FNAF 2 is a pain to play. It's just noise the game. It's so fast, it happens so much. There's not really a way to predict it. And when you're at the highest levels, you can just die to RNG. It's just not fun to play. Sorry. FNAF 3, everyone agrees, is kind of rough to play. Because it just keeps Scott. It's not Scott. I'm about to talk about Scott. It's keep William in a corner simulator, right? And Scott made it, you know, scarier because, you know, FNAF 2 wasn't that scary, but then the jump scares weren't that bad. So then we got FNAF 4. FNAF 4, I would argue, is probably the best game to play when you understand how it works. Unfortunately, it's really hard to understand how it works. I didn't understand FNAF 4 for a very, very long time. It wasn't until, like, I think David Barron had to, like, sit me down and explain how the game works. But now that I know how the game works, I actually really enjoy FNAF 4. Everyone, everyone, especially in a video essay world, everyone knows that Sister Location is a visual novel. Got a great custom night to it. The base game, though, not fun on a replay. And then there's Pizza Sim, where I love a simulator. I love the daytime modes of Pizza Sim. I, to this day, don't think anybody understands how the night gameplay of Pizza Sim is supposed to work. I don't think it does, dog. I to this day, I just place a thing down and hope and pray. But then we have Help Wanted. And Help Wanted, genuinely, pretty fun. I have a really fun time with it. It's VR. I think without VR, it's not as fun. And then Security Breach comes out. And Security Breach has fundamental problems. But it is a fun game. Like, I don't know, maybe it's my bias. I have a lot of fun playing Security Breach. But Help Wanted 2, I genuinely think is the most fun game in the franchise. It's just a genuinely really fun to play game. Not that scary, but really replayable and really fun to play. And then, you know, Ruin came out, and it was like one of the scarier things we got in the Steel era. Not as replayable, I would say. It is like once you play Ruin once, it's like, I got it. And then we have Secret of the Mimic, which I think is a lot more replayable and is really fun. Secret of the Mimic, gameplay-wise, I think is one of the best the games has come out with. You know, it's very much that, like, almost Metroidvania style game where, like, you get these keys that unlock doors and you get access to more areas, all the while avoiding this constant threat. Like, that's a good gameplay loop. But I think, here's the thing. I genuinely think, and I'm not saying this is a guarantee. I don't want to come off as, like, facetious and try to imply that my opinion is the correct one. But in my opinion, I think the people who insist the Scott FNAF games were fun and better to play, and the Steel Wool games are not fun and bad to play, I genuinely think it's just been a long time since you've played a Scott FNAF game. I genuinely think that's true. Because here's the thing. Recently, we've gotten fan games that are incredible to play. And non-fan games that are FNAF adjacent. Like one of my favorites, Playtime with Percy. It's not a fan game. It's just like a sit and survive styled FNAF game, or FNAF styled game, but it's just genuinely really fun to play. And you might be remembering them when thinking of the Scott games. So that's my thoughts on that. Is that there is some bias, but it's a blend. But thank you for your question. And I gotta go. We're about 45 minutes. I think we're going to call it there. So once again, if you have your questions you want to answer on the podcast, you can go to the Patreon to get a priority answer, or you can send it in to Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com, which send them in. I'll still get to them, but it is a pain to type out, so it's in the description to copy and paste. But until next time, thank you for watching the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast, where the pizza abilities are endless. I hope to enjoy our future patronage. Bye-bye for now.